Hey everyone, welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today I'm going to be talking about how change comes when we amplify unheard voices. I learned a lot through my conversation with this week's guest, so I'm excited to share this episode with you. Kevin Patel is an intersectional climate justice activist and the founder of One Up Action, which is an organization that is supporting intersectional youth activists in their change making efforts around the world. I really enjoyed talking with Kevin about his work, so without further ado, let's get started with this episode featuring Kevin Patel.
My name is Kevin J. Patel. I use he, him pronouns. I come from a community called South Central Los Angeles, or South LA, as many others call it. I've lived in Los Angeles my whole life. I really started beginning to fight as an intersectional climate justice activist, and I've been doing it for the past 11 years. I started at a very young age, around 12, because I was directly impacted by the smog and air pollution here in Los Angeles and in my community. But I really started, my activism even earlier, given that both my parents are climate migrants themselves, coming from India, and their parents are farmers. And so I really kind of learned a lot of the knowledge that my grandparents, my family heritage had, which is being farmers around growing our own food and really prospering around that. And from that knowledge, I kind of realized here in my community in South LA, we have a huge issue of food injustice and food desert. And I focused on the issue of food insecurity a better part of 1 year during my sixth grade year, first semester, and really teaching my peers that we can grow our own foods and really learn about non-GMO, organic, and vegan options rather than just the fast food restaurants and chains that are like a block away from our community, right? But when you go into wealthier communities, you have those types of healthier options. And so I just noticed that injustice in my community, and that's the first injustice that I began with. And then second semester of my sixth grade year, obviously I was impacted by the air and smog pollution. And I realized it's not just one issue that my community is facing, it's a multitude of issues that my community is facing. And if I don't speak out against it, if I'm not utilizing my voice to do everything to protect my community and the people that I love and the place that I grew up in, then no justice will be served, both for my community, but also for the planet. And ever since then, I've been advocating for, environmental justice issues and just, overall climate issues, not only my community of LA, but, worldwide as well, internationally. And throughout the 11 years, I've done quite a lot and involved in quite a lot. But in 2019, I founded an organization called One Up Action International, which I continue being the executive director for. And we're really focused on empowering young people to implement climate solutions within their own communities. And the way that we do that is by resourcing them, amplifying them, mentoring them, and making sure that every resource that is possibly available to us, we can resource to them to get solutions off the ground and really implemented, instead of waiting around for solutions to be implemented. So that's a lot of the work that I do now, really wanting to support the next generation of not only climate leaders, but also our generation, Generation Z, who's coming up with these innovative, bold, and ambitious solutions that many other generations previous to ours have never come up with, and make sure that we can actually get them implemented. So that's a bit about me.
That was a great way to get started. So, I want to just dive in and have you tell me more about One Up Action. I would love to know more about the work you're doing with the organization and what the day to day work looks like while you're running this project. And you're reaching young people all over the world. So, tell me more and give me the whole scoop on One Up Action.
Yeah, of course. Our mission, One Up Action exists to empower every young person to understand and implement solutions to the climate emergency. And so we do this again through the development, funding, and scaling of youth civic engagement and grassroots climate solutions. And we especially do it in marginalized communities. One Up Action has key fellowship initiatives that we're launching. First one being the Youth Solutionists in Government, the Youth Innovators, and then the Action Incubator Fellowship. Our domestic program, the Youth Solutionists in Government Fellowship, is really centered on three frameworks. First framework is having young people build out policy, so citizen ballot initiatives. Our second framework around in the fellowship is Youth Climate Commissions, which One Up Action is actually the first organization ever to create a Youth Climate Commission here in LA County, where I live. And then our third framework is for young people who are running for office to have a climate platform. So what that means is like policies that they should adopt while they are running for any position in government. That these are bold policies that they should be adopting, and instead of just like the mediocre regular policies that are out there, there are many more policies that they can adopt that are more ambitious. And so those are our three frameworks for the Youth Solutionists in Government. And I'll get into the Youth Climate Commission a little later on, but that's what our domestic program looks like right now. And then our Youth Innovators Fellowship, and then our Action Incubator Fellowship. I'll start with the Action Incubator Fellowship. That's really the incubation of new solutions and new innovative ideas to solve injustices that are coming about, new injustices that are coming about. So it's really the incubation of new solutions that have never existed. And a lot of young people, they're always innovative. They're always coming up with solutions to solve new issues and new injustices that are coming. And so we wanted to have a fellowship that kind of tailors to that in the incubation period of like, how can we get and support young people with seed funding resources to really get that project or initiative off the ground. And then our Youth Innovators Fellowship is drawing from frameworks like Speed and Scale, Regeneration, Project Drawdown, just solution books, and frameworks that exist that are out there. How can we draw from those solutions? And then really support the young people who are implementing those solutions that from an existing framework of solutions. How are we supporting those young people to implement and really get off the ground? And so that there's a case study to be made that, hey, there's a solution that's being implemented in this community. It's making this certain impact, and this is why we should be spreading this solution elsewhere and really getting that off the ground. And so these three fellowships are going to be launched this year in 2023. Hopefully, we're really kind of starting with the Youth Solutions in Government, and hopefully we'll be launching that in February. And then our two other fellowships, which are more internationally focused, and everyone can apply for those, are going to be launched later down the year. Currently, we're in the phases of raising funds for those. But those are the, day-to-day, kind of what we're focusing right now is to really make sure that we get these fellowships off the ground. And we're coordinating and working with young people still around the world to really, see what they need instead of dictating, what they need. We're really working with them to kind of say like what resources, what help, what is the issues or barriers or adversities that you're facing to get this off the ground, this initiative off the ground, and how is the youth climate movement really reimagining and redefining what activism looks like through this modern lens of moving from conversation and still having conversation, but to getting to implementation and really seeing an impact in local communities. And so I think that's really what One Up Action is focusing on day to day.
I think it's so interesting that you're taking this international approach to climate change activism because, of course, your experience to climate change being in LA compared to another person's experience living in another part of the world will be different, and you're going to face different challenges when it comes to the environment. So, as far as your own experience with climate change, you mentioned food deserts, pollution, and other aspects of climate change that you face in LA. I think a lot of people have the privilege of hearing about these issues, but not actually having to experience them, at least not right now. Can you tell me more about your own experience with climate change growing up in your community? How has climate change affected you personally, or your family, or your community as a whole?
Yeah, many people are saying the climate crisis in Los Angeles, such an affluent city. And I think people really need to, step into the shoes of people who are coming from majority Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. And I think when a day to day life of a community member here, it's plagued with many injustices, right, and many different issues. But I think a lot of these issues are really interconnected and really intersectional. And the way that I kind of approach making people understand that is I started at a very young age, and I even at a very young age I was able to pick up that there are so many different issues. One, starting with the lack of healthier foods from my community. But if you go to like Calabasas, Beverly Hills, or the west side of Los Angeles, you can see that there are much more opportunities and access to fresher produce and healthier meals and things that you would not see here in my community of South Central Los Angeles, or even neighboring communities that are considered marginalized. And a lot of the time, what I talk about is a disinvestment in not only my community, but neighboring communities and communities worldwide where there's, a sacrifice zone. And essentially what that means is, a lot of these industries and governments and even local government is telltale in the sense that they are directly responsible for the cultural disinvestment, the actual disinvestment, where they come in and extract all the resources and put these polluting industries within our own backyards. And the freeways historically have been built in through our communities. And then when you look at the tree coverage within in our community, you will see that there is a less of a tree coverage in our community. But when you go more into the affluent communities, you see that there are more trees than in your community. And so it's a multitude of layers. In every layer that you pull back, you see that there's more and more issues and more problems with how people are being affected by this issue. If you are But even if you are affluent, you can't escape, especially here in California. A lot of people are noticing, even if you're affluent, you're not going to escape the wildfires. You're not going to escape, the flooding. You're not going to escape a lot of these different issues that are weather related. And then even with the heat waves, I think our unhoused community members, they're the ones that are going to be affected, especially here in Los Angeles. They're the ones that are being affected at the forefront of the heat waves. Not only are they being affected by heat waves when it gets to the hundreds or 120, like some of our heat waves get to that point where it's just really unbearable for people to be outside. And then even during our winter time, it gets pretty cold, and even the weathers of like rain. I just kind of think about our unhoused communities and how they are at the forefront of this crisis. And I think stepping back of how people are kind of being affected daily and how I'm being affected daily, I'll get into that a little later on. I'm kind of going in the tangent, but I want to start with our unhoused community members, how they're being affected by the extreme weather, and how they have inability to have access to fresh water, good food, and services. And so they're the first ones that are at the forefront of this crisis. And I think people need to realize that this is not coming to our doorstep in the next 10 or 30 years. And I think a lot of people are waking up to that fact. But I think a lot of people still think that it's a thing of for the next 10 to 20 years. No, it's already here at our doorstep, and and the people who are feeling the effects of it the most are unhoused community members, and then our communities who are obviously have been historically disinvested. And so it goes into my community of South LA, and how we've been historically disinvested in one way, multiple ways that I can kind of point out, which I've already pointed out in the beginning, is how these polluting industries are right in our backyards, like the fossil fuel industry. Many communities borderline of South LA. I know South LA closed down our last oil drill, or the fossil fuel industry being in our neighborhoods. But neighboring communities like Wilmington and just other communities, El Segundo, still have a prominent presence of the fossil fuel industries being in their backyards. And if you were to do a tour, a toxic tour of those communities, you can see that it's unbearable. And a lot of these people who are Black, Brown, and Indigenous and just BIPOC individuals have to live with that daily. It's a daily reminder that they're waking up because their community is historically disinvested and they just don't have the money either to fight back or to move out of it, you know? And so that's one way. And then another way is the freeways being built right, in our through our communities. I don't live that far away from a freeway, not even 2 or 3 blocks away, and you'll find a freeway, and that causes a lot of air and smog pollution. And then we also have factories around South LA and just different neighborhoods, and that also contributes to the air and smog pollution. And so, and then when we talk about things hidden injustices, we kind of go into the injustice of of the lack of trees, and I mentioned that earlier. And where you'll see less tree coverage here, but you can if you go a little bit far west, to those areas that I mentioned, Beverly Hills, Calabasas, all those areas, you can see that there are a lot more trees. There are a lot more access. There's a lot more investment in that community. And so I talk about that of like how, as a young individual at a very young age, I started realizing the issues of food injustice, how our unhoused community members are being at the forefront of this crisis, how there's been a historical disadvantage in our community, and just multiple other ways that people are being affected. And I'm just only talking about a number right now. This is just a number of issues that I'm talking about. I'm sure there's, others that I'm not even touching upon about the health crisis and all these other issues that goes upon it, right? And that is placed upon our communities. And I think it's important to realize that it's never going to be one issue. It's a majority of issues that young people and just people in general in my community are facing and having to face that are coming from and rooted in the systems of oppression. I will quote my good friend Leah Thomas when she says, when it comes to the exposure to poor air quality and water quality, BIPOC peoples are disproportionately impacted by that. And so, in context, environmental racism is such a huge and prominent thing, and it should be connected to climate change. Climate change is this huge word, but under it, there's so many caveats and connections, and it's a whole thing of like, yes, we should worry about climate change, but climate change impacts so many communities already, not only here in the United States, but worldwide, right? In many different ways, and also at many different levels. Many people don't have housing because of the extreme weather. And I count myself fortunate in the sense that we are only barely feeling the effects of climate change, but others around the world, even in our country, are feeling the bare, not the bare minimum, but the maximum force of what the climate crisis can look like. And so I think it's prominent to understand that this is not just one or two issues or three issues. It's a multitude of them, and everything's all connected. And so, for me, in that connection, I just there's no one way to answer this question of like, well, how did you come about, kind of connecting with people around this issue? I just try to make those connections and make people see that everything is connected, right? And if they were to sit in their own community, what things can they see? How are people impacted? You at home can find out that your community might not have access to like fresh foods, right? That's an injustice in itself. You might notice the lack of trees in your community. That's an injustice at itself, and so a lot of people can, if they just take the time to like be observant of their communities and the issues that are going around the issue in their communities, they can tie it to climate change, and they can tie it to the systems that have caused climate change, and that being the fossil fuel industry, and how governments have for so long gone along with these industries to continue causing these injustices to communities. Sorry, that is a long answer, but I just wanted to kind of give a full context of like how this issue is such a huge issue. Can't be just, answered in one go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate that whole explanation and just you sharing that. There are so many different ways that people are and will continue to be impacted by this issue. So thank you for touching on some of them. So I have one last question for you. Lots of young people, college students, high school students want to create change and want to make a difference, but they may not know how to get started. Do you have any advice for those people who may be listening?
Yeah, I think start by utilizing your voice. I think it's the most important, it's the most powerful tool in our arsenal. It's utilizing our voices, just saying realizing that if you know that there's an injustice in your community, whether that be climate change, whether that be gun violence, whether that be women's rights, whether, whatever issue matters the most to you, utilize your voice to make that difference. If I would have never utilized my voice when I first was impacted and I started seeing all these injustices, I would have never been where I am today. And so utilize your voice, gather your peers, bring others in, join local groups, do your research, I know it can be taxing sometimes of having to see all these headlines and news articles about the issues that are happening and the injustices that are happening across the world. But I think if you're doing your research, you're able to really utilize your voice to make a difference. Um, as individuals, I always kind of say we have quite a lot of more power than people think we do. And when I mean those people who think we don't have that power is like, our governments and these corporations. We have the power of our voices and our dollars. And realizing that we have more power to make change and we're united together. And so I can list off a multitude of actions to do, creating our own policies slash motions, with the Youth Climate Commission here that I did in LA County, being the first ever in the world, first ever in the nation. Every other young person can start a Youth Climate Commission in their counties or even wherever you're listening to this. And then we also have the ability to unlearn and learn new things. And I think that's the beauty of activism, is to unlearn things that we've learned in school that might not follow with our ideals, and then learning new things, and really kind of being cognizant of making sure that we are learning things or making a difference. Also being very intersectional and intergenerational in our advocacy. We have to learn from those who have come before us, and utilizing the tools and tactics that they have placed, that they have used, and kind of integrating it within our advocacy. And also, two important things I will leave off with is that please, please, please make sure that you are amplifying unheard voices, those being the most impacted by the climate crisis, and then also acknowledging environmental racism and injustice, whether that be in your own community or, communities that are neighboring or just in general. Also, while activism is a huge thing, I also always say rest is resistance, and find time to rest. Yes, utilize your voice, but also make sure that you are resting, and so you can recharge and continue doing the amazing work that you are doing. Be hopeful, be optimistic, like John Lewis always said, and also get in good trouble, like the late great um, Representative John Lewis once said. So yeah.
I learned so much from this conversation, and I just want to highlight that last point Kevin made about amplifying unheard voices. I think Kevin's work with One Up Action and everything he's doing to support other climate activists really speaks to how Kevin is embodying his own advice, which I always respect. No matter the issue you're working on, or what field you're in, or what you're passionate about, I think that piece of advice applies to everyone, and we can all keep in mind that change comes when we amplify unheard voices. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can find Kevin on Instagram at I'm Kevin J. Patel to get connected with him. You can also find One Up Action on Instagram at One Up Action to learn more about the organization. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at bethechangepodcast. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.